This huge riding stretches north from the U.S. border all the way to Hudson's Bay. It's roughly the size of France. It has more isolated indigenous communities than Nunavut. The traditional pulp and paper and lumber industries have declined with each decade in favor of tourism. The region is a haven for fishermen and hunters, including its coveted properties on the Lake of the Woods. Politically, the riding has always had close three-way races with a strong NDP vote. But the seat has alternated between the Liberals and Conservatives. The Trudeau Liberals took this riding from the Harper Conservatives in 2015. But in 2019, the Tories took it back.
I'm David Bruno, the Liberal candidate.
Oh, hello. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Hi, bud. Can I leave you a pamphlet?
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. I don't suppose you've decided yet how you're going to go?
In this election, the Liberals are pinning their hopes on candidate David Bruno.
Pretty good weather, or?
Yeah, gorgeous.
I love it. This is my kind of weather.
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
He's a specialist in cybersecurity, and he's worked for the Government of Canada and in the private sector. He speaks 4 languages. He grew up in Thunder Bay, in the neighboring riding, and he has lived and worked in Europe and Asia.
I've always had the idea that I was going to get into politics one day. It's always been in the back of my mind, even going through university, and especially coming from Northwestern Ontario. I mean, for me, it was something very obvious. You know, this region really does need direct representation and a strong voice that understands the issues on the ground, knows how to get things done in the government.
How are you? Good, how you doing? Eric Milillo, Member of Parliament.
The incumbent MP in this riding is Eric Milillo. He's from Kenora and has worked on a number of Conservative campaigns. When he won this seat 2 years ago, at 21 years old, he was one of the youngest members of Parliament ever elected.
Well, I think this election is about who we trust to guide Canada's economic recovery from the pandemic. As we've been talking about, it's not just the health crisis that we've been put through, but one of the greatest economic recessions since the Depression. So that's really something I hear around the riding, whether it's housing, whether it's jobs and affordability. It's really about who we trust going forward over the next few years to rebuild our economy.
The NDP came within 500 votes of winning this riding in 2015. Early in the campaign, Jagmeet Singh made a swing through the riding to support candidate Janine Seymour. With him were Manitoba NDP leader Wab Kinew and Ontario NDP Member of Parliament Sol Mamakwa. Both are well-known Indigenous politicians, and both are pledging their support to Seymour.
Friends, we are hanging out here in Kenora with Sol and Janine, our candidate in Kenora, and some friends! Woo! Yes!
I want to give a big shout out to our incredible candidate in this riding in Kenora, Janine Seymour. She is an Indigenous lawyer, powerful voice. Janine's going to make a big difference for the people of Kenora, and really, really excited to have her on the team and excited to be here.
So during the campaign, my strategy, because we are still in a pandemic, this election was called during a pandemic time, and it's posing great challenges. So last night, actually, Sol assisted me with his social media following. So I'm going to look to my brothers behind me and the following that they have to try to get the message out. So as respectfully as possible, I'm trying to get out to the people, but also say, please come see me. I'm available. I want to hear from you. Please come. Please reach out.
You know, I have some staff that are helping out in the campaign, and that's why I'm here, to help out in the campaign. And certainly I think it's to talk to people and introduce Janine to the North, because the First Nations in the North don't know Janine, but I know she is First Nations first. So I think that's really important for them to get to know.
The easing of COVID restrictions meant the return of the Dryden Summer Agricultural Fair, with its horse races, cattle judging, and poultry exhibits, and a chance to vie for the prize for the best vegetables, baked goods, or handicrafts. Any serious candidate has to have a presence here. Today, Conservative candidate Eric Milillo was pressing the flesh among mostly familiar faces.
All right, if you have questions, you call me. Okay.
For your campaign, what is the biggest challenge?
It's a good question. I think for everybody, the biggest challenge is just dealing with the pandemic, campaigning, with masks, with distancing, and sort of finding new ways to do things in some respects. And I would say hopefully something that doesn't become a challenge, but something that's in the back of our minds is any potential unpredictability with the pandemic. As we know, we are in a fourth wave, and we obviously, we've seen in the Northwest Territories there's been some a bit of a surge in cases there. So we're hoping that nothing like that happens, but that's, I have to say, would be probably the biggest challenge for all of us.
Ryan Stelter is the managing editor of the local newspaper, the Kenora Daily Miner and News. He's keeping a close eye on the election in this riding. In this riding, what do you think the issues are? Coming out of a pandemic and in the place we are at now, what do you think the issues are?
I think, well, obviously a big one across Canada is housing, right? I think that's huge in Canada, but I think specifically here it's also quite big. I mean, no one can afford a house, and there's, it's definitely a buyer's market. People can't get a place to rent. That's a huge issue.
Are people coming in from the urban centers and buying up areas around here?
I've heard that, but I mean, that's all, it's a small town, right? It's hearsay. Like, if people do buy and then but a lot of landlords can just buy a house and flip it and rent it immediately, not have to, change or anything. And, and seniors are still living in houses that they've been living in for years, but they want to leave. I remember my neighbor, actually, she was like living in this big house, and she's like, I'd love to have a condo and live in Kenora still, but she can't, right? So there's a lot of empty houses in a way, so I think that's a huge issue. I mean, obviously Indigenous issues such as clean drinking water and treaty rights and all that kind of thing. There's upwards of 40 First Nations in the riding, so that's quite a large chunk of the voter base is Indigenous. So there's that aspect of it, and I think another one too. The opioid crisis. I think we are struggling along with a lot of prairie provinces in overdoses. We have some of the highest in the province. So I think that homelessness and addictions and opioid crisis are kind of all tied together.
The two most important things would be accommodation, affordable accommodation, and health care. I think that's the biggest things.
Are you leaning, have you made up your mind? Are you leaning one way or another?
I'm voting PC.
Why?
Why? Because I'm hoping to get the Liberals out of there as quick as possible.
What about, what else about the PC attracts you in terms of their policy?
I like our local guy, Eric Milillo. O'Toole, I can't go one way or the other on him, but I'll be voting for our local guy.
The most important thing, I think a lot of First Nations going without water. That's something important. You don't really hear much about that, or the missing murdered women, or all of the children that are being found in residential schools. There are thousands. Like, that is not talked about at all. There's been thousands of kids that have been found in graves, and that's not talked about. It's barely talked about. I mean, it was big when there was 250 kids or 215 kids found, but they're still doing searches, and there's thousands.
Here's a question. In 2015, a lot of Indigenous people in Canada voted for the Liberals. I mean, there was a big change, right? I mean, that was the election where so many people decided in Indigenous communities to vote federally for the first time.
Yeah, that was.
And there was a lot of enthusiasm, there was a lot of optimism. Where do you think people are headed now in terms of how they might vote?
I don't think it's going to be with the Liberals this time.
For NDP candidate Janine Seymour, reconciliation isn't an abstract concept. As a lawyer, she has traveled and worked in the riding's Indigenous communities, and she comes from a family affected by the residential schools. We met at a site in Kenora, which has a profound significance for her and many others. Tell us about where we're standing right now, because this is a very special spot.
Yeah. This riding, Kenora, had the highest number of residential schools per capita, and that's something that I was very active in my former life as a lawyer, and why I kept saying that and getting that education out there. People need to understand what that means, and why is this area have the highest number of residential schools per capita. We have the highest natural resources and that extraction. The two go hand in hand here. It's not a coincidence. And here in my community, having a former residential school site here, we've been heavily impacted by trauma. And that has hit us hard for 7 generations down the family line. And so here, the elders are meeting and they're gathering, because we now have to come together and heal as a community. It's time.
But what do you do to ensure that is a call to action, that somehow spurs action among non-Indigenous Canadians?
Well, part of that is voting for what you believe in. Who do you believe to be best representative to work through some of these really hard issues that affect not just Indigenous people. Residential school is a Canada national issue. This affects all of us. We're all carrying those impacts of knowing or being complacent, or how many family generations have you been here and what was your role then?
Well, I can tell you that, the Liberal government has worked as a partner with our Indigenous communities. We're going to continue to do so, and I'm going to try to bridge the gap in that area. And for me, it's very important to bring a voice to Cabinet and to caucus. And I think that working together with our Indigenous communities, I'm going to convince them that I can be a very effective voice for them in Cabinet, in caucus, in Ottawa. When you look at the issues, the Liberal government has been very, very good to our Indigenous communities, and we're going to continue to bridge that gap. The Liberal government has been the only one to address the issues, for example, with boiled water. We've fixed 190 boiled water advisories, something that even the Conservatives didn't even address. Just talking about it like the NDP doesn't necessarily bring change. So what I'm representing is actual change.
Is it difficult? You mentioned boil water advisories, but is it difficult when the government specifically and explicitly promised to end every boil water advisory within 5 years, i.e. within last March, and you didn't meet the target?
Yeah, there's always challenges. You can't avoid those sort of things, but we're on target. We're going to do it. That is the objective, and we're going to finish it.
How are you? I'm intercepting you here. You're not allowed any further. Things going. For me, it's all about building relationships and showing what we can do. So I've made it a priority for me to represent all the people across this region. It's a vast region. 42 First Nations, 9 municipalities, and of course very unique issues. So the first opportunity I had to speak in the House, I asked a question in question period about the Grassy Narrows First Nation and the support that was needed there, and I've been a consistent advocate for not just the First Nation communities, but for all the communities across our region and their unique needs. So I'm going to continue to do that and continue to build those relationships.
Back to the streets for more on what's on voters' minds.
The environment's so different than it was 5-6 years ago. Obviously, homelessness situations. How are we going to get back to normal? How do we revamp the economy? It's going to be some big challenges, and I don't know what the answers are.
Are you leaning any one way or another in terms of deciding who?
No, not at all.
Based on this past year and a half, I think economic recovery is something we need to start thinking about. I think we've been talking about, you and I talk about this, the environmental situation is becoming way more at the forefront too.
I'd actually agree with that one. I think environmentally, I feel like with the pandemic we got distracted, rightfully so, but I think we need to refocus on climate change, environmental issues.
What I can tell you is that the Liberal government's the only government that has moved on this file, and we're going to continue to move on this file in bold action. We have met with world leaders in trying to meet our emissions, and we're going to continue to do so. And the right way forward, for example, is the elimination of single-use plastics. There's lots of things that we can do, and the Liberal government's on top of it.
Does it make it more difficult, though, to differentiate yourself when the Conservative Party has now put in the window a carbon pricing scheme?
Absolutely. It's a bit of throw the bone out there. Where were they when they were in power? They were ignored. They had their back to all of the crisis that we are in, and now we're at a tipping point, and now we have to deal with it. And it's very, like I said, it's rich that they would come up with this policy just before an election. Can you believe them? Do you believe them? I don't.
With our approach, we're going to be scrapping Trudeau's carbon tax, which filters money towards the government to spend on his priorities, and we're going to invest instead carbon pricing funds into low carbon savings accounts so that Canadians have the option and the freedom to invest in green alternatives themselves.
The opposition parties, or the other parties who are not Conservatives, point though to your convention, and at the convention there was a motion, and it was recognizing recognizing climate change as being human created. That motion didn't pass. That garners a lot of attention, and people say, how can the Tories be serious about any climate change policy if in convention they can't pass a motion saying that climate change is man-made? What do you say to them?
Yeah, it's a good question, and for a lot of people I understand how they have that reservation just looking at the headlines, but the fact of the matter is that policy was not a simple one-line policy that climate change is real. There was many other things put into it. It was almost an omnibus policy, if you want to put it that way. And I think that there was talking with different people that attended the convention, there was different things and different lines that some people took issue with. So it's the fact of the matter is you can't just pin it on one line. I think it's just again the Liberals and the other parties wanting to make a political issue where there really isn't one.
What do you tell people when they say one of my biggest concerns is climate change?
Well, that's my biggest concern too.
Yeah.
Look at this area. I've been here my entire life, and we're seeing things that historic lows, historic highs, the forest fires, and all the climate change that's occurring here, the water levels, the fact that we can't drink the waters that we used to. Those are all so alarming. I have children, so no, that's my concern too, and I will be making sure to move on it.
It's a sunny weekend, and local residents are enjoying a music festival overlooking the water at Kenora's Anishinaabe Park. And Green candidate Remy Rowe is working the crowds.
My name is Remy Rowe. I'm actually the Green Party candidate here in Kenora.
Okay.
So I'm going around introducing myself. I want to meet as many people as possible. The Green Party is a lot bolder. We're a lot stronger in facing this thing head on. We don't have the luxury to continuously try to say, we're going to take one little... Addressing the climate change is like having a toothache. You go to a dentist and you don't tell them to pull it out a little sliver at a time. You address it head on, boldly, and with power. And that's what we need to do with the climate change. You have that tooth pulled out right away, get rid of the pain as fast as possible, and help save the planet.
You know that a lot of people will be asking the question. The Green Party this time around, a new leader, Annamie Paul, but she's faced open challenges to her leadership just before this election. That certainly has got to risk turning people off the party. How do you respond to people who say, yeah, I like the party, but I'm hearing all this stuff about the leader having problems with the party membership, the party faithful?
Great question. We're a family. Name one household that doesn't have some kind of problems, conflicts. The big thing about the Green Party and why I like them is their transparency. You don't just bring out your clean laundry. They brought out their dirty laundry and they faced it, which means that their commitment to the party, every member right across the board, their commitment to the issues are bigger than their conflicts. And that is a party of the people.
What's important, I think, is the economy, like and where it's going and what's going on with it. That's what's important to me.
When you hear the federal politicians talking and the candidates talking, what do you want to know from them, or what do you hope?
It's not what they're saying. It's what they're doing, and they're not doing anything, which is really hurting everybody. I mean, in this town, every food industry in this town can't get people. Why? You know, somebody's done something wrong in the political end of it, and I don't know exactly what it is, but yeah. This place closes 2 days a week that we're standing in front of right now because they can't get manpower. Every restaurant in this town has a shortage. Every place has a sign in front of it, and there's nobody working. Why is that, I wonder?
And it's not just the restaurants. It's all of the businesses are suffering right now. There's just nobody to work.
Okay, I'll ask a question. You don't have to answer it. But does that mean are you leaning any one way or another in terms of how you might vote, or who you might have a better?
I'm definitely not leaning towards what caused this problem.
Which is?
I would say Liberals.
I hate to see the homeless. That's the worst thing. That could happen to anyone, and it could happen to anyone, because people on even minimum wage are having a hard time keeping apartments.
What about the housing crisis here? What makes it particularly acute here in this riding?
Oh, well, it's acute everywhere. I mean, if you have to take a look around the gorgeous Lake of the Woods to see that, I mean, these properties have been desired for a century, and it's not going to go away. Right, and the housing crisis is just going to go up and up, and the only thing we can do is use the tools to our advantage and available, like with the Bank of Canada, to make sure that these interest rates don't go through the roof. But in the meantime, you know, what I really do like are these programs for young people to rent to own. I mean, it's music to my ears. Give someone the ability who can't get off of rent to rent and end up owning their house. It's wonderful.
I hear it in Kenora, I hear it in Dryden, Sioux Lookout as well, and many communities. Pretty well everywhere I go, I'm hearing something about housing, and you know, it has to be a lot more, in our opinion, than just government investment, because the biggest issue we're hearing here is supply of housing. There's a lot of demand. There's a lot of young families, entrepreneurs, and workers that want to move to the region, but can't because of the housing issues. So one of the things our party's looked at is the fact that the federal government is actually the largest property owner in the country, owning most of the real estate, and we want to free up 15% of that for development and create incentives for private developers to come to northern regions such as ours and invest in that.
I want to help too and get things organized, and so I'm going to put a call out this weekend for volunteers, community ambassadors is what I'm calling, but people who need help to get downtown, who just need information, or maybe you need some ID, right? Like maybe you don't live here, sir, or you need, you know. And so we really want to help facilitate that and break down some of those barriers for you guys.
Going door to door on the reserve, NDP candidate Janine Seymour receives an all-important endorsement from one of the elders of the community, George Kakiwe, a residential school survivor and former hockey star.
Right now I'm in campaign mode. Okay. We only have 20-something days. And so I'm here to ask if you're intending on voting and if you're going to be voting for me.
Of course I intend on voting.
Okay.
And I'll be voting for the NDP. I'll be voting for you.
Miigwech, George.
As a 12-year residential school survivor, you know, it's a real deep personal feeling for me. And I think that needs to really happen in terms of you know, reconciliation, to be honest and true about it. And not just words, you know, as most politicians do. But I feel sincere that you're going to do it. And you know, leaders, you know, I really trust that he's going to do it. We've been lied to before. I hope that we do succeed, you know, put you up in Ottawa and speak on our behalf. Should be great.
Miigwech.
Probably the majority of people, of Indigenous people in this riding, vote Liberal. What do you say to them?
I think that when the climate has changed nationally here with the discoveries, you can't ignore that we've lived through a pandemic together globally. The pandemic has hit everybody, but the discoveries of the, I'm going to call it 215 because that was the triggering moment, but we're here right now on a former residential school here in my community, and I can't tell you how much this has impacted me, my children, and it's going to impact my future children too. And so what I'm saying that things have changed. So they may have voted Liberal before. Things have changed, and I'm asking for them to vote NDP and stand behind me, support me.
Well, first of all, what do you think about having an election now?
I think it's important for all of us, First Nations. We're never neglected of the elections. We're always including, but we're all supportive of our people that are running. Like Kenora is our neighborhood, so.
Are you leaning one way or another? Have you decided how you might vote?
I always voted for Liberal, but if the other candidates want to lift up better sources, yes, I'll go for that.
Well, I think dealing with the pandemic is number one, with me anyway, that we do everything to get back on the track of a normal society with the economy going and people living a normal life. That's what I think is number one with me.
A lot of people were critical of the decision to have an election now. They said, well, we're still in a fourth wave and all that. Is that something that you have an opinion on?
That doesn't bother me because I think most parties would do that if they thought there was a slight advantage.
Hi, I'm David Bruno, the Liberal candidate for the upcoming election. Can I leave you a pamphlet?
Sure, yeah.
Pure politics. You have an NDP candidate who's going to have the strength of being an Indigenous Canadian, an Indigenous person, who is going to be drawing on, hopefully, a lot of support, she says, from Indigenous communities. Sure. You have an incumbent Conservative who has the benefit, at least, of having been elected and having sat in Parliament for 2 years, and then you're the newcomer.
Right.
What do you say to people to break through?
Well, I say I'm not really that new. This is my first time going as the federal Liberal candidate, but I'm not new, and I'm not going to run as a single issue candidate. I'm multifaceted and multi-issued. I've worked with the government. I know how to get things done, and it's really important to have a voice at the table with cabinet and caucus, and that's what I represent.
Some people say you're very young. You were one of the youngest MPs ever elected. Is that an advantage or a disadvantage? Because we have run into a few people in the street who say, well, that Eric fellow, I don't know, he came straight out of university almost, and he's into being my MP. How do you respond to that?
Oh, I say my record speaks for itself. I've been the MP for 2 years now, of course. I'm the only candidate in this riding who has experience being an MP, and I think in the last election we won primarily because people were ready for a change. They were ready for a change from the status quo and for someone who would represent their needs with passion and with motivation, and that's exactly what I've delivered.
It's tough to call. I think it's, you call it a swing riding, I guess. I mean, it's just, I think Kenora probably goes more on the candidate and who's going to represent the riding better than maybe the leader, because we know we're not going to have the swing or the power to decide who's going to get in power. That's already decided by the time it gets here. So I think we in Kenora try to pick a representative who's going to represent our values better than the next guy. I think again it'll come down to the wire, and I think 338 Canada, last time I checked, it was a toss-up still, and I still don't know. I can't make a call right now myself, just judging on what I've seen. So it'll be definitely more fun to watch. I know it won't be the hotly contested Centre Toronto riding, but I think it'll be fun for me and other people to watch as well.
For CPAC, in the Kenora riding, I'm Martin Stringer.